Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here to the first Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. This morning, we're going to have a work session and we're going to discuss House Bill 612, which is the Relief Act of 2021. I think that what you'll find is that what we've tried to do in this bill is just work to help not only our Maryland citizens, but also work to help Maryland businesses. And what I'm going to do is, I know that Delegate Jackson's and Impellieri will be joining us later. I know they have some other votes that they need to take, so they'll be on when they get finished with their voting. But what I wanted to do was have Laura just walk us through the unemployment insurance sections of the bill. And I would point out that the bill was heard February 4th in Ways and Means. It was a joint hearing with myself, Delegate Ahrens, and Vice Chairwoman Dumais in attendance. So again, I think there are some really good things that are going to come out of this bill. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laura to walk us through them. And then if we have any questions, if you just, like we do in committee, just raise your hand and I'll answer you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We're joined today by my colleague, Steve Ross. He does fiscal notes for unemployment insurance. And so he's here to provide some extra support. If you guys have questions that I'm not able to answer. Chair Carey said that it would be okay if I shared screen, and we're going to walk through the reprint. Yes. And I had sent a handout in advance that I think will be helpful to you now, but also in the time before the committee vote, so you can know where in this long reprint to look for the different UI provisions. So I'm going to share a screen and pull up the reprint now. Can everyone see this okay? Yes? Okay. So this is, the House is actually working off of the Senate bill. So it's Senate Bill 496. This is, as Delegate Carey said, an administration bill. It has, the majority of the bill is various tax components. So that's why Ways and Means is primary. ECM is secondary because the bill has a number of unemployment insurance components. So in the reprint, we're going to go to the first part. And I tried in the handout to provide a breakdown of the bill as introduced, the provisions the Senate added, and then the amendments that the House is considering adding. So you'll see on the screen here, section 10207 of the tax general article. The bill as introduced had a income subtraction modification for UI benefits that was ongoing beginning in tax year 2020. So essentially beginning in tax year 2020, UI benefits would no longer be counted as income for tax purposes. The House is proposing to amend that. So instead of that being an ongoing exemption, it would be just for tax years 2020 and 2021. And I actually did not include that in the initial handout. So I added a section about that in the House amendment section, and I'll resend out the handout to cover that. But you can see here that in addition to limiting it to just 2 years, it would have to be means tested. So the exemption would only be available to an individual whose federal adjusted gross income for the taxable year did not exceed $75,000 for an individual, or $100,000 for a married couple filing a joint return, or an individual described in Section 2 of the Internal Revenue Code as head of household or a surviving spouse. So the House is taking a more limited approach to this than the Senate. Do you all have any questions about that?
Laura, this is Ahrens real quick. Am I allowed to just jump in, Ned? I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead. That's fine.
I just, when you said, go back over the who gets the exemption, 75K for single, 100K for filing jointly, and then you went on, what was the last piece?
So I guess it's 75 for an individual, and then the 100,000 threshold is for a married couple filing a joint return, or an individual described in federal code as a head of household or a surviving spouse.
Okay. Okay. All right, I missed that piece. Thanks.
Okay. So the bill as introduced also had a provision that would waive benefit charges on an employer's earned rating record. And so what that means is basically their claims experience, the layoffs that they incurred. So the bill as introduced, I'm trying to find it. It's in section 3. Here we go. Okay. So initially, as introduced, the bill was going to say that the rating year, which is used to compute the experience rating, which is used to compute their tax rate, would not include fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020. So to back up a little bit, an employer's UI taxes are a function of their experience rating and whatever tax table our state is in for that calendar year. So the experience rating is calculated typically from the 3 preceding fiscal years. The computation date is in July. The calculation is actually made in September, but the Department of Labor looks at the layoffs that an employer has incurred in that year, and then that affects their rate. It's like any other insurance, like auto insurance, right? You have a bunch of car accidents, your rates are going to go up. So it's the same thing here. So when looking at an employer's tax, what they pay, it's based on their individual claims history as well as whatever the tax table our state is in. So this year, the state is in table F. So what this bill is trying to do is hold constant the experience rating piece to pre-pandemic claims history so that the employers will feel the hit of going from table A to table F, but they will feel less of a hit if their claims experience is not accounting for layoffs due to the pandemic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Laura. So basically all of the tables have like the minimum, they have a range. So they would be at the low end of the range because of that, correct?
Yes, if their prior claims experience was lower, right? So if they have a history of laying off a lot of employees, their claims experience would be frozen at that pre-pandemic level.
Right.
And Delegate Ahrens, I see, has his hand raised.
Yeah, Delegate.
Thank you. Laura, walk me through real quick on how this would affect somebody like an employer that has really thrived during this pandemic.
So what I was just about to discuss some amendments. So the Department of Labor requested clarifying amendments, which you can see in the reprint here. So as introduced, the bill was going to waive the benefit charges for 2 fiscal years. And now what the bill is doing is it's saying, you can see in subsection D here, except as provided in paragraph 2, computation date means July 1 immediately preceding the calendar year. So July 1, the immediate preceding calendar year. But for the period beginning March 5th, 2020 through the second July 1 after the expiration of the state of emergency declared by the governor due to COVID, computation date means July 1, 2019, if that date results in a lower rate of contribution. So it came to the department's attention that some employers may have better claims history now than they did in their pre-pandemic period. So the amendment accounts for that and says basically whatever the lower rate of contribution is, that would be what applies for them while this is in effect. And so this provision would only be in effect for a few years. Let's see. So this provision would apply prospectively for claims filed after July 1st of this year. And the experience waiver, this language would sunset on June 30th, 2025. It's important to note that the governor issued an executive order in December that waived benefit charges for a period of time. And so this is sort of expanding upon the existing executive order. I don't know, Steve, if you have a better way of explaining how this builds upon the executive order, but I view this as just kind of an extension.
I can cover it really quickly. So basically the executive order is temporary. When the state of emergency goes away, this sort of relief system will go away. But because the look back period is so long with unemployment insurance, you could run into a scenario where the executive order goes away because we're not in a critical COVID environment, but then the law kicks back in and we look back over those periods. So what the original bill put in is it sort of made those, the next couple years of pandemic related claims, sort of took them out of the equation. The amendments do a very similar thing. It's written a little bit differently, but it effectively does the same thing, but writing it this way allows the department to sort of give you the lower of the two rates. I think that might be the reason that they sort of went this way. Also, this language as amended tracks with the duration of the executive order, which effectively tracks with the duration of the state of emergency. So the longer the executive order is in effect, the longer this sort of grace period, for lack of a better term, will exist under the law through 2025. I think it expires. What that basically means is through tax year 23 or 24 is sort of the likely of the two time periods that we're going to be using pre-pandemic claims history, or the lower of the two. So it's going to go out a couple of years under this amendment.
So now thank you, Steve. So now there's more of a tail, so that the employers would benefit from the charges or layoffs beyond just when the state of emergency ends.
All right, I have two questions. On the one that we're talking about, the way it's written now, if, as Delegate Aaron said, someone sort of did better during COVID, this just means they get the lower rate.
With the amendment, yeah. So as introduced, it would have just been
Whatever the experience was.
Pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm.
Pre-pandemic, right? Okay. Back to the very first amendment, I do have a question. Just, Steve, can you tell us what the rationale of the Ways and Means Committee was for limiting it or doing a means test?
I can't speak to the rationale of the committee itself.
That's fine.
Yeah, I sat in a few meetings, and I think that the House was looking at, so the Senate added this Recovery Now fund, which is $520 million, and the House wanted to do a more targeted approach to ensure that businesses and individuals who are most affected by COVID received the greatest amount of relief under the bill. So there are, although this is means tested, there are a number of other provisions of the bill that I believe that they tried to give everyone something, but they tried to focus the relief as best they could on individuals and businesses that would most benefit. And Delegate Luedke, his subcommittee met at 9 today. I'm sure he could speak more. And my co-counsel or my counterpart, George Butler, who's staff to Ways and Means, will be in the ECM voting session this afternoon. So he may be able to provide some more context about why that decision was made, but just provide more targeted relief.
Okay, thanks.
Delegate Ahrens.
Yeah, just one more. Delegate Dumais, Madam Vice Chair, you brought up a point, and I don't know if I heard it right. So if my business has thrived during this and I've grown, I am going to be benefiting by a lower rate, you're saying, a potential lower rate. But if my business has died, I just find that a little bit different, because it seems like we're rewarding rewarding people, what I guess, is that a reward for being able to work or have essential workers, or how is that working? I'm confused about that.
You're talking about the claims history and their experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I view this as only positive for businesses. I can't see how this is negative.
Well,
in any
it's
way.
positive. It's positive for the business that has grown, but at some point, I mean, I'm looking forward. At some point, we have to fill these coffers back up, and that is something I don't think we've talked enough about. The whole thing is how we're going to actually fund these things moving forward. And I'm a very pro business guy, and I hate the rates we have currently, but I do think that there is responsibility somewhere, and we have to start looking at what's next. This, that's all I'm bringing up. I don't even have the right answer, and I don't mean to be looking for somebody to pay more, because that's never been my intent. But it's something I think we should talk about in this bill, or maybe not this bill, but certainly moving forward.
So there are different approaches that the legislature could take to build upon or change the executive order. This approach, is definitely an extension of the executive order. So the fund will be impacted more negatively under the bill than it would have been just under the executive order as it stands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in
Delegate
general-
Adams.
Okay, just to kind of follow up real quick with it. Moving to the tables is the big revenue change. So you can think of this experience rating sort of grace period as it is a way of targeting. It's another way of targeting those who are businesses who have been hit most. The revenue hit compared to the rate table change is relatively minor. Probably not enough to move the needle in any particular year between rate tables. It would have to be multiple years before you would do that. Just for context, the moving to F does collect most of the revenue that it otherwise would, with or without this experience rating change, particularly in the first year.
Thank you, Steve. Delegate Adams, you had a question?
Well, it was just actually Steve saw my thunder. At the end of the day, unemployment insurance is still a employment insurance, and you have to live within the constraints of the tables and the different rates within the tables. The idea that I think to solve the problem that Steve's talking about, you would have to re-envision what unemployment insurance actually is, or frankly deliver some form of a tax credit that would substitute what's happening in UI. And I think that would be very hard for the committee, especially our subcommittee that has UI as its focus. To fix that problem, you'd have to do some major changes to UI.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, you'll see some bills, I think, that are going to try to look at to study this in the long term.
I was just going to add that the Department of Labor had also requested amendment language that you can see here in C2, so that if the secretary determines that an employer has established a pattern of failing to respond timely or adequately to requests for information, the secretary would be authorized to use the regular computation date, to use the employer's regular experience. So I suppose that the department wanted an additional tool in the secretary's toolbox for employers that maybe aren't complying with requests for information. So that is the language that you see here in C2. And then beyond the experience piece, so we are going to go to some of the provisions in the bill that the Senate added in. So this is in section 9. Scroll, sorry if it makes you dizzy. Let's see, section 9, here we go. So this is the Recovery Now Fund, excuse me. So the Recovery Now Fund has a lot of different transfers, appropriations, 3 related to unemployment insurance. So there were $40 million for, as the Senate passed it, $40 million. That would be a $1,000 grant to any individual. I'm trying to find the language for you. So here is where you can see in line 17, the House is proposing to change the amount from 40 million to 32 million. That the $40 million, there's a write-up in the bill later on, but essentially it's a $1,000 grant to any individual whose claim for unemployment benefits is pending a determination of eligibility and has been in adjudication for at least 30 days, except for a claim where the failure to determine eligibility is related to an allegation of fraud. So the members will remember over the interim, the briefings with the department, there's this group of claimants who are kind of waiting. I mean, you all have heard, your offices have received the complaints from individuals who have applied and not received their benefits, and they say they're waiting for months and months at times. And so the Senate wanted to provide targeted relief in the form of a $1,000 grant to those individuals who are waiting still for a determination that they're eligible. And so anyone who's, you know, if their eligibility is on hold because there's an allegation of fraud, the individual would not be eligible for the grant. And the individual is only eligible for one grant. So the House is proposing to change that from 40 million to 32 million. The next, oh, go ahead.
Laura, what does that do? So is it no longer $1,000 grant, or they're just reducing the pot down by 8 million? You're still going to give the $1,000,000, the $1,000.
Still $1,000. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and these are the people that Senator Klausmeyer, these are the people she lovingly refers to in UI purgatory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next line item in the Recovery Now Fund is this, let's see, Office of Unemployment Insurance, $3 million. And so that amount is proposed to stay the same in the House amendments, but they would change it. So that $3 million have been set aside to hire additional caseworkers. And that language was changed to say to augment staffing. So it's a bit more general that the money would just need to go to staffing at the department. The last line, oh, Delegate Ahrens has a question.
Delegate Ahrens? You're muted, sir.
All right. I know you guys going to hire more people. I kind of thought we had a tremendous number of people working there already. Over the last year, we've hired and hired and hired. I was under that impression.
Yeah, they have hired some staff. They've also hired some temporary staff to help them in their call center. And these are people, I guess, over and above that they need to help continue to man these calls. Like I said, you know, I'm sure you're still getting the calls in your district where people would just still need help.
You know what? Honestly, I mean, every meeting I've been on with UI, that's been one of the things we're hiring. That would be a question I would like to have answered. I mean, if we're going to, I'd like to know the size of the department at this point, based on all I've heard. And quite frankly, what do we need more people for? We should have enough by now. That's all.
Delegate, that's a great, and we can certainly ask them the total numbers so far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I see Delegate Jackson has joined us, and Delegate Jackson has a question. Delegate?
Yes, I'm just going to say, I believe that many of the employees that were working at UI also was pulled from other department agencies, you know, to help out. So I'm sure they probably have to go back at some point. So maybe that's the need to officially hire more. So just a thought.
And I think as well, I think some of the workers are from temp agencies, so they're not actually permanent employees of the department. They are being brought in just for right now.
Exactly.
Respectfully, could we still ask a question?
Yes. Oh, of course.
Absolutely, Delegate. We will ask that question.
The last line item is again, Office of Unemployment Insurance, $1 million. And so as the Senate passed it, it was to increase work share program participation with the goal of reaching at least 5% participation by hiring a marketing firm to basically advertise our work share program. The House is proposing to change that language, so it'd still be $1 million, but it would be just to require the advertising of the program rather than having a 5% goal in participation increase.
Okay.
And let's see, then the rest of the House amendments, let's see, we already discussed. Okay, the last piece is in section 4 of the bill, page 7. So in working towards creating a targeted approach to help employers who need it most, the House is looking at establishing a deferral program for employers. So, sorry, I'm trying to find it in the draft. It's hard because when you have amendments, pages get inserted without page numbers. Let's see, here we go. Okay. So what this language is saying is that
You want to go up? This is reimbursed, Laura.
this is where it starts in the
Okay.
draft. So the deferral, the bill is with this amendment is establishing a deferral in calendar year 2021 for contributions that regular employers make, as well as reimbursements that reimbursing employers make to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. So reimbursing insurers are nonprofit organizations and governmental units that elect to self-insure and reimburse the trust fund. So what the amendments are doing is saying that for calendar year 2021, a nonprofit or a unit of government that's elected to self-insure and reimburse, as well as just regular employers that pay into the trust fund, can defer the payments that they're owed to the trust fund through the first 3 quarters of this year. So they would need to pay before, I believe it's January 30th, 2022, but they would have the option to defer on paying. So that's essentially what it does. The bill has the amendment also includes language that says for calendar year 2022, the secretary is authorized to allow employers and reimbursing employers to, defer those payments as well. So this is limited to employers with fewer than 50 employees. So it was designed to help smaller businesses that feel they cannot afford to pay their UI taxes or to reimburse, that they have some latitude this year in paying. And this has been run by the U.S. Department of Labor, and we were told that it conforms to federal program requirements. So the expectation is that Maryland would borrow more money from the federal unemployment account to cover one-year cash flow needs, with the intent that the state would repay the loan as soon as possible after any deferred payments came in 2022. It's important to note that because it's an election, some employers may choose not to defer, so the impact to the fund isn't necessarily all employers are now not paying in. There may be a good number of employers that decide they don't want to wait and have, double the payment come due next year. There's also a hope that Secretary Robinson has been very clear that she and her federal partners in the congressional delegation have been asking for a grant instead of a loan. So there's hope that if states are getting these loans from the federal government, eventually the loans would become grants and the state wouldn't have to pay back, in which case the employers would be benefiting from essentially having their taxes, I guess, forgiven. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. Steve, is that correct? If we get a grant, how would that impact the?
So, okay, a couple things going on here. If we did get a grant like that, it's not in the bill as written, but there, you could down the line, you could I believe, do that. Like but that's not necessarily part of the bill as introduced. The
Right.
couple things going on here. Through March 14th, loans from the federal government are interest free. That was extended in the December stimulus when they extended basically PUA and the other major federal unemployment programs. That could get extended again, these sort of interest free timing. Excluding the interest free timing, what this basically is a 9-month, 10-month cash flow exchange that we're doing, that this proposal would do. During the months that borrowing occurs to pay like the revenue that doesn't come in, you still have to make benefit payments. We would owe interest on that money that we would be borrowing. The idea is come January 2022, when all of 2021's taxes, the amount that was deferred are paid, because you're not getting a permanent exclusion, it's still owed just later. You pay it all back. So what that means is the cost to the state is the interest to carry that debt for, up to 10 months, depending on when they take out the initial borrowing. Why that is important, the timing is important, is because most of the revenue for a tax year for unemployment insurance comes from the first quarter payments, which are the revenue comes in April and May. It's about half of the revenue for the year comes in April and May. So what that means is that most employers pay most of their taxes in the first quarter of the year. So what this is doing is it's basically an extension of the due date through the year, and that's the idea behind this. And it works for both taxable employers and nonprofits. You may be interested in the sort of the means test that's in here for like the size of employers. So less than 50 in the state, it's about 90% of employers have fewer than 50 employees. But they only got a quarter of payroll. Okay, so that's the difference here. Like that's the data points.
So Steve, this is Delegate Carey. So does that mean that if a loan to a state is forgiven, I assume then that every employer will benefit from as the UI system would become more solvent, and would that relieve pressure on the schedules?
Ultimately, yes. If the loan is forgiven, that is money that does not need to be drawn down out of the fund when it receives tax revenue, which would increase the balance of the fund relative to what it would have been. And the sooner you build the balance back up, the sooner the tax rates go back down.
Okay.
Just by the way the trust fund works, yes.
And I see Delegate Adams, you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to add a comment or perhaps a question, but the concern, and do an extension or a loan, is that at some point that has to be repaid. And I don't have at hand the dollar amounts we're talking about here, but it's interesting that it sounds like at least we'll be hearing that there's a federal component that would turn a loan into a grant. What's happening, like with the PPP loans, and I'm choosing this for an example, is that these were loans that were going to be forgiven, and then there was some question about how it was going to be taxable. My only point in saying all this is that it's at some point an employer who elects to do this puts themselves in a difficult spot if the day comes where it's being paid back, and perhaps their business is not in a very good spot, because we really don't know what the economy is going to look like a year from now. So this is mainly an observation. I don't know how many businesses will see this and say, yes, I'll do it, and then realize at some later date that, well, that I thought it was a grant. I didn't realize it was just deferring off to future date. It has me worried anytime we have these programs, and politically having discussions about turning them into grants has the potential of hurting some businesses, but I know the intention is to help. Just an observation.
And Delegate Adams, just to clarify, I apologize if I was complicating things too much by bringing up the hope that the state would get this loan that turns into a grant. For the individual employer, this is just a deferral. So there's no loan of any kind that they'd be getting. It's just saying, hey, you don't have to pay your taxes this year until, early next year. But the it is all related, but I just wanted to make it clear it's not individual loans to the employers. It's just the deferral.
Yeah, well, I mean, the deferral is in essence I use the word loan, but what I really mean to say is you're passing that expense to a future date as opposed to what they're usually used to, paying it. It's an observation. It's all.
Okay.
Order of magnitude, real quick, trust fund in table F in a year, about $1 billion in taxes collected. Okay. Small businesses are about a quarter of payroll in a year. So outsized effect, if every employer did this, every small employer did this and sort of, allocating, you're looking at $250,000, $250 million, I spoke, in like potential revenue. I haven't worked the final numbers, but just for order of magnitude, that's what you're looking at. About a quarter of the roughly $1 billion in taxes under table F.
That's a big proposal. That's thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Aaron's, you have a question?
Just a comment. I got a little bit confused when we were talking about rates and back to normal. Everybody's talking about what we're moving a lot of stuff around. What does back to normal mean? And are there any protections in this that, let's say we raise something as we move through this, we come back to normal? Are there any protections in this bill to define what back to normal is? I don't even know what the question I'm asking is. Other than I know we're changing some things in the end of this when this pandemic's over. I want to know if things will just, while we're already doing it, let it go. And that's what troubles me about the bill and moving things around.
Well, I guess in thinking about the House position on this bill, so the income subtraction modification piece, the House is proposing to limit that for 2 years. So, as the governor initially proposed it, UI benefits would not be treated as taxable income forever. The House is now saying, let's limit that to just 2 years. In terms of the experience piece of the bill, it is, as introduced, it was a little bit, I would say it would coincide more with just the end of the state of emergency. With the amendments that the department is requesting, the Department of Labor is requesting, there's more of a lag so that the employers would have their experience, they would have the help with their claims experience it says the 2nd July after the state of emergency ends. There's more of a tail to that. So it's a longer period of time where they're getting the benefit of maybe pre-pandemic claims experience. And then as far as the deferral piece, which wasn't in the bill as introduced, this is it has to be an option for all employers with fewer than 50 employees for calendar year 2021. And then there's an option for the secretary to allow those small employers to defer in 2022 as well. So everything is in some ways limited. I'm not saying that that's satisfactory to you, but there are limitations for the UI provisions. It's nothing, as I understand it, nothing is in perpetuity for these 3 provisions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Laura, do you want, is that?
I think that is everything. So the bill has an emergency effective date. It is moving through the process very quickly because the UI provision that has to do with income, UI benefits not being counted as income for tax year 2020, that is apparently the comptroller begins making those determinations within the next few weeks. So the legislature is trying to move very quickly to ensure that the comptroller has this when making determinations about people's taxes. And there are other provisions of the bill, there are a number of other provisions of the bill that also need that time from they're time sensitive for the comptroller.
Okay. Are there any other questions before we adjourn? All right, before we adjourn, let me just first of all say thank you to Steve and Laura. As always, you guys have done a great job. And I would just remind the subcommittee that, as I said before, that the goal of the bill is to get money into the hands of businesses and families quickly. And hopefully you've seen that in the House. I mean, nothing's perfect. Nobody gets everything they want, but we've tried to make things strategic and pinpoint to make sure that we do achieve that goal. So with that, I would just thank everybody for being here today. And if you have any other questions,
Mr. Chair, we're voting on this afternoon, is that correct?
that is correct.
And I'm sorry if you said that and I missed it, but
No. So yeah, and like I said, I just want to thank everybody for being there. And if that's all, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Thank you. All right, everybody, have a great